In the last video, we set up our player as an actual rectangle box, and then we have our animation. So that way we can separate the two. The character graphic will be run through all the animation for running, jumping, falling, and even dying. And then the player box itself, that's what's going to be the object that you move in your game, run and jump, where the animation you see physically, but you will not see the actual player box. So in this video, we're going to cover getting these two to run together and then running through all the different animation and putting the correct behaviors on the player itself. So the first thing I want to do is that I want to go ahead and scroll down, and I'm going to zoom out, and I'm going to select my tile map. Currently I have my tile map selected. This is what I created the world in, the tile map object. I need to make sure that if I go over in the properties, I'm going to provide the solid behavior. This is going to allow my player to stand on these blocks. So if I go ahead and look in the properties, and I'm going to locate the behaviors, I want to add a behavior, and I'm going to add this solid behavior to allow the player to stand on the blocks. And then now I'm going to add the behaviors for movement to our player box and not the actual animation character. So on the player box, so if I was to put this into position, and then I go to behaviors, I'm going to locate, and I want to locate under movement, I'm going to give the platform behavior. Now there's all kinds of different movements that you can use for moving your objects in the world, but we're going to stick to the platform behavior, which allows us for jump and run along a platform. So I'm going to add that behavior, and you can add more than one behavior. So I'm going to add a new behavior, and then I'm going to add this scroll to. This is going to center whatever object this behavior is on. It's going to center it sort of like the camera. So as the player is moving around, the camera will follow that object that has this scroll to behavior. So I'm going to add those two to the player box. And if I save my work for a moment, I'm going to do a play test first just to see what's going on here. There's my player, and I can move with the arrow keys. You cannot move with the WASD keys. I will talk about that later on once we get into events, but you actually have to program it, construct. Its default keys for movement for platforms is the left and right arrow keys and the up arrow key for jumping. And so as I'm jumping on all the platforms, I can't jump. I can't go through that. It's solid. I can jump up on top. I can jump down. And I can go and I can test out my level without even touching the animation. I can verify the fact I can't run through the level. I can run down. I can't quite reach that. So if I wanted to get back up and over, I would have to actually redesign or maybe give my player a little bit more jump strength or maybe a double jump on that. Okay. So now my player is working because of its behavior. Now again, if you wanted to add that double jump in the properties, there is a double jump value. I can check that off, save my work again. I can play test again. And if I want to do a double jump, I'm going to press the up arrow once, twice, and I get a double jump out of my player. So in fact, if I came over here and I went too far, I can double jump back up and I can get myself out of trouble. But that's going to be your call as the developer of your game. And so I'm going to turn that off, and I'm not going to allow the player to do a double jump. Now, how do I get this player animation to stay and show up? Well, the first thing is that this player, I don't want to see the green in the game. So I'm going to scroll down in the properties. And at the very bottom of the properties on this object, there is this initial visibility or initially visible. If I turn that off, you're no longer going to see that when you preview the game. You can see it here in the design, but not in the preview. So I'm going to go to play, and I can't see my player. The player now is invisible. I cannot see that anymore. And that's what this initially visible is happening. I'm going to remove that. Now, how do I actually know if the player is actually being seen? That's where we're going to put this player as an animation, and we're going to set its position to the actual object here. So if I go to the event sheet, I'm going to add an event. They've given us a nice example of how to create an event. There's a margin, then we have the bullet object, and its condition is when this bullet object collides with the little monster, that's the condition. And if this condition is true, then the actions are to destroy the monster, destroy the bullet. And that's what makes up an event. And you can look at how events work and going through that as well. But we're going to add an event. And this first event, to make sure that the player's animation stays at the actual player box, is this going to be a system object. This is a system object. I'm going to go to next. And I'm going to look under general, and I'm going to look for this every tick. This is AKA always, or every frame the game runs. I want this event to happen over and over and over again. And that is putting the player animation object at the position of the player box. So every tick, click on next. So that's the condition that needs to be met. Once this condition of system, every tick, has been true, then we're going to create the action to set up. So add action, and this is going to be on the player's animation. And I'm going to go next, and then I'm going to scroll down towards the bottom for the size and position, and I want to set the position to another object. Set the position to another object. The other object is the player box. So next, it's going to ask me, well, what object do you want to pin this to or position it to? So I'm going to click to choose. I want to choose the player box. And then I want to click on OK. It's given us an optional image point. The origin is at 0 by default, and we fixed the origins to match. So I'm going to leave that alone, and I'm going to click on done. And I'm going to verify. Whenever you're programming, this is event-driven or visual scripting programming. You're not writing lines of code, but you are programming in a sense. There's logic involved here. And so whenever you make a change, it's a good opportunity to save your game and preview your changes to verify that what you've done is in fact happening. So I'm going to go back to layout, and I'm going to go ahead and preview. And there is my blue character. It's at the position of the player. And if I press the right arrow key for moving and left, you can see now I can have my blue character as my player and no longer my green rectangle. I can see this now. But obviously, it's not going through any of the animations just yet. We need to program the animations to work. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get off the preview. And you can verify that worked because my blue player is outside the layout, and when I previewed, this came into position and pinned those together. Okay, so now how do we get the other animations working? Well, the first one is that we need to get this character face in the correct direction. We're going to make sure its eyes are facing left or right based on the movement, because this player, in its run animation, it has the eyes facing in the right direction. So if we were to transition, we want to make sure that the eyes are facing in that correct direction on movement left or right. And this is going to be with the keyboard object. So I don't have it yet. I need to insert it. So I'm going to right click, and I'm going to insert a new object. And I'm going to locate under input, is that I'm going to locate the keyboard object. You can only include one of these, or one keyboard, one gamepad, one mouse, one touch. You're never going to have more than one keyboard in your game. So the name keyboard is perfect, or touch, or mouse, or gamepad. So in this case, I don't need to rename this. I'm just going to go ahead and insert this into the game itself. Save my work, so I made some changes. And when I go to the event sheet to set this up, you're not going to see this actually happening just yet, because the character in idle, its eyes are directly straight. So we don't know if the player in fact is mirroring or not mirroring, but I'm going to set this up in anticipation for us to set the player up. So if I was to go to add event, this is going to be on the keyboard object. The keyboard, you need to press the key on the keyboard. That's the event that gets triggered in order to mirror the actual animation. And so I'm going to go to, and it could be for any character. If you're in run or jump, you want to make sure that you're mirroring correctly depending on which animation you're currently in. So go ahead and choose the keyboard object. I want to look for on key pressed. So you're pressing the key on the keyboard. Well, which key? We currently can use the right and left arrow keys for motion. So that's what I'm going to go with, is I'm going to go ahead and choose, click here. It's going to ask me to press a key. I can choose left or right to set that up. I'm going to go ahead and go in the left first. So left arrow, and then OK. And then I'm going to click on done. And then I need an action. This character by default is going to face in the right direction, so mirroring it is going to go in the left direction. So add action. This is going to be on the player's anim or player's animation. And then I want to scroll down to appearance, and I want to set mirrored. Set mirrored. We're given two options. You can mirror or not mirror. Left is mirrored, right is not mirrored. And if you set one, you got to set the other. You cannot just pick one. You got to do both. So I'm going to go with mirrored here. Click on done. So if I press the left arrow key, I want to mirror my character. And if I do the opposite, I'm going to go not mirrored. So I'm going to redo this event so that I press the right arrow key. So add event on the keyboard object, and then next, and then on key pressed, and then I'm going to choose the key. I want to choose the right arrow key, and then OK, and then done. And then now I want to mirror or not mirrored my animation. So go down here, set mirrored, and I want to go to not mirrored, and then done, so that I have those two set up in motion. Save my work. I can play test this, but the player itself, its eyes aren't moving in those directions, so I don't know in fact that that's actually working just yet. But will work is if I actually get the actual running animation set up. So let's go ahead and get that working here. So I'm going to add an event. This is going to be on the player box. That has all the platform behaviors. So next, and I'm going to scroll down. And I'm going to look for these animation triggers. So I'm going to start off with on moved. This triggers when starting to move. The player starts to move. Once the player starts to move, I'm going to trigger the walk animation or the run animation in our case. So next, and then I'm going to add an action. This is going to be on the player animation. That's what gets triggered. And here I want to set the animation. Set the animation. And then, well, which animation? It needs the name of the animation inside these double quotes. So if you don't remember what your animation name is, you can actually backspace these two, and then you can put the first double quote in, and it's going to give you a list of your different animations. In this case, I want to choose the run, and making sure that it's spelled correctly and in double quotes, because if it's spelled wrong, the animation will not work. And then from the beginning, and then click on done. And then I'm going to do the same thing. What happens if the player stops moving? We need to go back to idle. So I'm going to run this same event. Player box. I'm going to scroll down, and I'm going to look for on stopped now. And if the player stopped, the animation needs to go to idle. So go to player anim, and then I'm going to scroll down to set animation. I'm going to set this to idle. And then let's test this out, save our work, test this out, see what's happening. If I'm moving, he's going to move and move. So now, and as well, you can see the eyes, in fact, are moving in each direction. The eyes are facing right and then left and then back to center when he stops idling. So now we've got them moving left and right, but if I was to jump, it now has a little bit of a hiccup. I can jump and there's animations that are still going on, so we need to fix those. Close out, go back to the event sheet, and then I need to set up that if the player's jumping and falling, and then what happens when the player does jump and lands, that it goes back to either a run or an idle state. So I'm going to add 2 more events here. Add event on the player box, and then I'm going to look down here, and I'm going to look for on jump, so I can set the jump animation. Add action on the player anim. I'm going to go ahead and set animation, remove the double quote, look for the jump animation, and then I'm going to do the fall as well. Add event on the player box, and then I'm going to look down for on fall, and I'm going to go to add action on the player anim, set animation, make sure you have the double quote, and pick the fall. So now I've got all these set up. They'll work, but they're not quite working 100%. So let's take a look. So if I can jump, fall. And so when I fall, it goes back to the fall. So I can jump, it goes through the fall animation, and then when I fall, it stays there. We need to detect once the player does touch the ground again, that this should reflect that and go back to either an idle or a running state. So we need to fix that as well. Back to events. Now this next one's a little bit tricky, is that we're going to have multiple events that are running based on one condition. So what I mean by that is we first need to figure out, after the player jumps and falls, has it landed on the platform? So I'm going to go add event. I'm going to go to player box, and I'm going to scroll down, and I want to look for on landed. So the player jumps, falls, and lands. That's the condition that I'm triggering. Now I'm not going to put an action here. So the player does in fact land, but does the player land and stop, or does a player land and move? There's 2 different things going on there. And that's what they call a sub-event. So once this event does become true, we're going to check for 2 different conditions. And if one of those is met, then we're going to fire off those actions. The way to create a sub-event is that here on this green arrow in the margin, if I right-click, I can add, and then I can go over to a sub-event. I want to create a sub-event. And on this sub-event, I'm looking for, am I moving on the platform as I land or not? So on player box, next, and not under the other ones, but I'm looking for on the platform. So is the player in fact moving? And if the player is in fact moving, then I want to set this run animation. Now, I could refine this, or a fancy way is that I can copy these actions. So if I select this run, I hold the control or the command key on the Mac, and then click and drag, I can make a copy of that action. And then now I'm going to make one other, right click, add one more sub event. The the same one. So player box, scroll down to the bottom and look for is moving again. But this time I'm going to invert it. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to go to invert. That's the opposite. So this is moving, this is not moving. If I'm not moving, I want to be in the idle state. So I'm going to select this animation, Control or Command, click and drag down, and I've made a copy. And then I'm going to save my work, and I'm going to play test this out. So if I'm moving, I stop. If I jump, the player now goes back to a standing state on idle, or a jump, and there's a jump and back into run. So now we have a working player. The player has behavior. The player has animation on idle, on run, on jump, and fall. So we're set up to do some more beta test of our level in anticipation for some collectibles and some enemies. Thanks for watching.